The sky above Earth was not silent, but alive with movement. Alien ships filled the atmosphere with a hum that reverberated through every city and village. Humans looked up in awe and fear as the Vorath Empire ships descended, their sleek, dark forms, casting shadows that stretched for miles. Governments scrambled, sending military fleets into orbit, but nothing could match the technology that had arrived from beyond the stars. Scientists and soldiers alike watched the monitors with tense expressions, trying to understand the patterns of the ships, trying to predict their next move. But the aliens were too advanced for humans to fully grasp. Every sensor reading was a puzzle, and every signal was a warning of what was to come. Captain Elias stood on the deck of the orbital station, his eyes scanning the horizon, his hand resting lightly on the control panel. He had trained for years to face threats in space. But nothing in his life had prepared him for an enemy that could move faster than light and strike with precision unmatched. Earth had always been a planet of survival. Humans had endured plagues, natural disasters, wars among themselves. But this was different. This was an invasion from a civilization that looked at humans as insignificant, creatures meant to be easily subdued. Yet there was a fire in humanity that could not be measured by technology alone. Elias remembered the stories of the old wars of humans taking what little they had and turning it into weapons they had survived. In deserts, frozen lands, jungles, and oceans, they had adapted and evolved against predators that could have killed them in seconds. Now humanity faced a threat on a scale never imagined, and that fire was the only hope. The first communication came, not as words, but as a projection. A figure shimmering in light, the Vorath Emperor addressing the leaders of Earth, his tone cold and dismissive, declaring that resistance was futile, that humans were primitive, and that the planet would be annexed. Within days, the leaders of Earth felt a chill, but Elias felt something else, a spark of determination. The words may have been meant to intimidate, but they also underestimated the one thing the aliens could not measure: human unpredictability. The people of Earth began to organize in ways that had never been done before. Nations that had been enemies for centuries sent envoys to each other. Soldiers shared strategies. Civilians prepared defenses, and scientists worked around the clock to understand the alien technology. They took the scraps of intelligence from probes and satellites and began to build tools, weapons, strategies that were unorthodox but effective. Every movement was calculated yet flexible because humans had learned that survival meant thinking differently and acting boldly. Elias watched as a squadron of fighter jets took off from a hidden launch site, their engines cutting through the sky with precision. They carried experimental weapons, designed to disrupt the alien energy shields. It was a gamble, but humans had never shied away from risks when faced with extinction. The first reports came in. The ships had been hit small, but significant damage. The Vorath forces were startled. No one had expected humans to strike back so quickly and so effectively. The aliens adjusted their formations, sending larger warships closer to the cities as if to intimidate. But humans adapted, moving people underground and using the cities themselves as weapons, turning streets into traps and turning factories into arsenals. The air was thick with tension. But there was also a sense of unity that Elias had never seen before. He moved through the command center, speaking with pilots, engineers, and soldiers, each person working with a focus that transcended fear. Every life mattered, and every mind contributed to the plan. The aliens may have had technology superior in every measurable way, but they had underestimated the heart of humanity, and that heart was about to show its first sparks of the fury that would define Earth in the battles to come. The alien forces were not prepared for the unrelenting surge of humanity's ingenuity. Despite their superior technology and firepower, the Vorath Empire quickly realized something that shook their confidence. Humans could adapt faster than they could anticipate. Every attack, every countermeasure only led to more surprises. The invaders underestimated the resourcefulness of Earth's inhabitants. No one had imagined that a species that had been so fragmented in its past could unite so quickly in the face of annihilation. But now the world stood together. Humans used everything at their disposal, from factories to underground bunkers, to old warplanes converted into makeshift bombers with makeshift weapons crafted by engineers who had no time to spare. Elias stood in the war room, staring at the digital map of the solar system in front of him. The map was filled with red dots representing Vorath ships. Their movement seemed so deliberate, so perfect. Yet each one was disrupted by unpredictable human tactics. Nothing about humanity's response made sense to the aliens. They had expected a fight, but not one like this the humans weren't engaging in. Straight battles, no. They were using the aliens' arrogance against them, setting up traps in the shadows of the cities and the hills around Earth's most valuable locations. A group of human engineers had managed to hack into one of the aliens' surveillance systems using nothing more than salvage technology. They began feeding false data back to the invaders, misdirecting them and leading their fleet into decoys and fake targets. The Vorath fleet seemed to grow more disoriented with each passing hour. Then came the first real breakthrough. A group of human soldiers led by Captain Elias himself had infiltrated an alien supply depot on the outskirts of Mars. They used nothing but old terrain mapping tools and their knowledge of the planet's surface to bypass alien patrols and slip past their advanced security systems. It was a gamble, but one that paid off. The human team managed to capture a small alien transport ship, and for the first time humans laid their hands on the technology that had once seemed so distant, so untouchable. Captain Elias didn't hesitate. He ordered the ship to be brought back to Earth to be analyzed by the best scientists humanity had to offer. And that was when the real war began. Humans began reverse engineering everything from alien weapons to propulsion systems. They used alien technology to enhance their own, making advancements in days that would have taken centuries to achieve on their own. The tide had begun to turn, and the Vorath were stunned by the sheer speed of humanity's progress they had come to conquer. But they were now in a war they couldn't control. The first of the alien fleet's warships that had been destroyed by human ingenuity was a symbol of how far Earth had come. The ship's remains were sent as a warning back into space, a message to the Vorath that humanity would not yield. Captain Elias knew this was only the beginning. The alien empire had underestimated the strength of Earth's resolve, and now they were realizing their mistake. With each passing day, the war escalated, but so did humanity's determination. The world's cities transformed into fortresses, making use of every available resource, from hidden military installations to civilian-built barricades. Every person contributed in their own way. Farmers, scientists, soldiers, children. All understood that survival meant unity, and that unity was something the Vorath had no way of understanding. Humans did not fear the unknown. They embraced it. Humans were at their best when faced with overwhelming odds, and every move they made now was a testament to that. The Vorath began to lose their confidence. Their once feared war machines now faced unexpected challenges and overwhelming resistance. Every battle seemed to have a new surprise that threw off their expectations, while their leadership panicked. Their soldiers grew more hesitant. The Vorath were used to dominance, to being the hunters, but they had forgotten one key fact. Humans were predators too. Humans adapted, humans fought back, humans would not bend no matter how many ships the aliens sent. No matter how many armies the Vorath assembled, they had woken a species unlike anything they had encountered before, and with every new strategy humanity developed, they realized that they had underestimated the true strength of Earth's apex species. The invaders were about to learn that it was one thing to declare war on Earth, but it was something far different to face the fury of a species that had survived and thrived against all odds. The battle for Earth intensified, as the Vorath forces realized their initial superiority meant nothing in the face of humanity's unyielding spirit. Every moment felt like a gamble, as humans utilized every scrap of alien technology to fight back and adapt faster than the invaders could learn. Each battle seemed like a new challenge, a new test for the Vorath Empire, who once believed they would crush Earth in days now found themselves entrenched in a war they could not understand. The Vorath had underestimated the one thing that made humanity dangerous: their ability to fight from a place of necessity and unity. Captain Elias knew that this war would not be won by brute strength alone, no matter how powerful the alien technology was. Humans had something far more valuable, a will to survive that no empire could take away. And that very will was what made Earth's resistance so powerful. Now every soldier, every scientist, every civilian felt it. They fought not just for their families, but for their very existence. The first major counterattack took place in the heart of New York City. A pivotal location for both sides, the aliens had landed their primary command ship in a heavily fortified area, believing the city's defenses would be easy to overcome. But they hadn't prepared for the humans who knew their streets better than any invader could. Hope to understand humans set up barricades throughout the city, but not the kind the aliens were used to. Instead, they used the city's very infrastructure, the alleys, the rooftops, the sewers to their advantage, blending in with their environment. As the battle began, Captain Elias and his team led the charge, taking control of a high-rise building that overlooked the alien landing zone. From there, they could see the entire battlefield, and they used it to their advantage using guerrilla tactics that the aliens were unprepared for. They struck from unexpected angles using their knowledge of the city's layout to blindside the alien forces and hit them where it hurt. The aliens had technology that could destroy buildings in a single strike, but the humans had something better. They had the element of surprise and the power of adaptation. The humans did not wait for orders to be given. They acted immediately. They built traps in abandoned buildings, turning entire districts into death zones for the aliens. The Vorath forces struggled to adjust to the unrelenting human assault. They were used to fighting creatures that would flee when faced with overwhelming force. But humanity was different when cornered humans fought back with everything they had. The aliens quickly realized that every strategy they devised to counter the humans only led to more questions and more problems. It wasn't just the unexpected tactics that threw them off. It was the humans themselves. The way they could take losses and turn them into advantages, the way they would lose entire battalions, but come back the next day stronger than before. Every time the Vorath thought they had wiped out a resistance cell, humans would rise from the ashes, stronger than ever. Captain Elias watched as one of the alien warships took a direct hit from a makeshift bomb constructed by human engineers using alien tech and crude materials. It was only a small victory, but it sent a powerful message across the battlefield that humans could fight back. No matter how great the odds, and the aliens knew it was no longer a matter of when Earth would fall. It was now a question of how much longer they could hold their ground. They had pushed forward expecting a quick victory, but now they were fighting for survival. They had underestimated humanity's power and their ability to adapt to the challenges presented before them as the battle raged on. Elias saw something in the eyes of the soldiers around him. It was not fear. It was determination, the kind of determination that could only come from knowing what was at stake. And that was when he realized something more than just technology was at play here. Humanity was fighting for more than survival. They were fighting for something the aliens couldn't comprehend: the right to stand against a superior force and not bow down to it. They were fighting for their very existence, but also for something far greater: the human spirit. To never give up, to always push forward no matter how much the enemy tried to overwhelm them. And as the city burned and the sky above filled with alien warships, Elias knew one thing for sure. The Vorath were beginning to understand something they could not have known when they first arrived. They were not fighting a primitive species, they were fighting humanity. And humanity had always found a way to survive. As the war raged on, the Vorath Empire began to see cracks in their once unshakable confidence. Their advanced technology, their superior fleet, their vast empire had been built on the belief that they were the apex species of the galaxy. But now, faced with humanity's resilience and adaptability, they started to question everything they had known about warfare, about survival, about what it meant to truly conquer. Captain Elias stood on the edge of a decimated battlefield, watching as his men worked tirelessly to salvage whatever they could from the wreckage they had been at war for months. But every day they adapted and learned something new about the Vorath, something that helped them stay one step ahead. Their strategies were evolving with every encounter, and the aliens were starting to show signs of hesitation, something no one had expected from an empire that had so easily crushed countless worlds. But the cracks were there, and they were widening. The Vorath commanders, who had once looked down on humanity, now found themselves in constant communication with their superiors, trying to figure out how to counter the unexpected turns humanity was capable of. They had underestimated humans in every way, thinking their superior weapons and fleets would easily overwhelm Earth. But they were wrong. Humanity was far more dangerous than they had realized. The aliens began to notice something about humans that they could not comprehend. It wasn't just the tactics. It wasn't just the weapons. It was something more. It was the drive, the unyielding will to survive, and the capacity for innovation in the face of annihilation. Humans did not have the luxury of relying solely on their technology. They had to think outside the box to make do with what they had. They used everything from old war machines to experimental devices created from alien technology. They scavenged through the wreckage of destroyed ships, turning alien weaponry against its creators and finding ways to counter the Vorath's superior technology. The alien forces were scrambling their communication. Lines were compromised, their strategies were disrupted, and their confidence began to crumble. It was during one of these key moments that Captain Elias and his team embarked on a daring mission to infiltrate an alien supply depot located on the surface of Mars. The supply depot held critical resources and technology that the humans had been unable to access. Until now, it was the perfect opportunity to strike, and Elias knew that this mission could turn the tide of the war. They moved quickly and silently across the Martian landscape, using the planet's terrain to their advantage. The aliens were too confident in their own security systems, thinking that their technology could detect anything that moved across the surface of the planet. But humans knew better. They had learned from the past, and now they had the edge. They bypassed the alien patrols and made their way into the heart of the depot. Once inside, they took what they needed and disabled the enemy's communication systems, leaving them blind and vulnerable. For the first time in the war, the Vorath were unable to respond quickly to human movements. The aliens were no longer the hunters they had been at the beginning of the invasion. Now they were the ones who were being hunted. Elias's mission was a victory, not just for the soldiers who had risked their lives, but for every human who had contributed to the fight, from the scientists working on reverse engineering alien technology to the civilians who had taken up arms to defend their homes. The Vorath had underestimated humans in every way. But now they were beginning to realize just how wrong they had been. As the human forces returned to Earth with the stolen alien tech, they had a new weapon at their disposal. But it wasn't just the technology. It was the knowledge that humanity could not be defeated, no matter how powerful the alien invaders were. Humans had found a way to fight back, and they were not going to stop until Earth was free of the alien threat. Captain Elias stood before his team as they celebrated their success, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and the aliens would not give up easily. But as he looked out across the horizon, knew one thing: humanity had already won in ways the Vorath could never understand. They had found a strength inside themselves that had been there all along. The aliens had believed that they were the apex species. They had believed that their technology and their empire made them unstoppable, but they had never accounted for the one thing that made humans different from every other species in the galaxy: the human spirit. A spirit that would never give up, a spirit that would fight and adapt. No matter the odds, and now the aliens were learning what it truly meant to face an enemy that would never surrender. The war had reached a tipping point every day. The Vorath seemed more disoriented, more desperate. Their once fearsome fleet now struggled to maintain control over the vast reaches of space, and the forces they had deployed to Earth seemed increasingly overwhelmed by humanity's unrelenting drive to survive and innovate. Captain Elias could see it in the eyes of the soldiers around him. The aliens were beginning to crack, and humanity's will to fight had become their greatest weapon. Yet there was still much to be done. The invaders had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, but it was now clear that the aliens were not going to give up easily, and the stakes had never been higher. Elias stood in the command center overlooking the latest battle reports. The situation had become even more complex. The Vorath had started deploying new tactics, trying to keep up with humanity's unpredictable strategies. Their attacks had become more erratic, their formations less organized, and that was where the humans saw their opportunity. Every battle was a learning experience, and now humanity was ready to strike with everything they had. The first real turning point came when human forces launched a coordinated strike against a major Vorath flagship stationed in the outer orbit of Earth's moon. The flagship had been a critical part of the alien command structure, and its loss would cripple their ability to lead the invasion. The human forces had managed to locate a weakness in the ship's propulsion system, a vulnerable point that the aliens had overlooked in their arrogance. It was a risky move, but Elias and his team led the charge, using a combination of human-made and alien weapons to infiltrate the flagship and disable its defenses. The battle for the flagship was fierce, but the humans fought with the ferocity of cornered predators. Every soldier knew what was at stake: their families, their homes, their planet, and they would not back down. From the fight, the Vorath commanders were caught off guard. Their elite guards were overrun by the sheer will and strength of the human forces. Elias himself had boarded the flagship, leading his squad to the heart of the ship's core. They planted explosives that would destroy the propulsion systems and cripple the ship's ability to maneuver. Once the explosives were set, the countdown began, and the humans retreated back to their own ships. The blast that followed was deafening. The flagship was torn apart in a massive explosion that sent shockwaves through space. The Vorath had lost one of their most powerful assets, and the message to the invaders was clear. Humanity was no longer just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. The destruction of the flagship was a turning point. It gave humanity the momentum they had been waiting for as the news spread across Earth. The people who had been fighting in the shadows felt a surge of hope. They knew that the tide of war had shifted in their favor, and the Vorath were beginning to understand that their plan to conquer Earth was slipping through their fingers. But it was not enough to defeat the aliens. Not yet. The Vorath regrouped, quickly launching retaliatory strikes. Across Earth's major cities and military installations, they were angry and desperate, and they would stop at nothing to regain control. But humanity was no longer the underdog. Every attack the Vorath launched was met with a counterattack. They were caught in a cycle of retaliation that they could not break, and each time they struck back, humans adapted and fought harder. It was clear now that the alien invaders had underestimated not just humanity's strength but its ability to endure and adapt. Captain Elias watched as the first signs of alien retreat began to emerge. Ships that once patrolled Earth's atmosphere now seemed more hesitant, their movements slower, as if they were waiting for something, and the human forces could feel it. The Vorath were running out of time, and they knew it. They had not only failed to conquer Earth, they had failed to understand the true nature of the species they were fighting. The human spirit had turned the tables, and now the Vorath would have to face the consequences of their arrogance. They had declared war on a species they thought was weak, a species they thought they could crush, but instead they had awakened a force that would not rest until victory was secured. The war was far from over, but now humanity had the upper hand, and the Vorath would soon learn the cost of underestimating Earth's apex species. The shift in the war was undeniable. The Vorath forces had suffered devastating blows, and their once dominant fleet had been reduced to mere fragments scattered across the stars. Their morale was in shambles, and their commanders could no longer maintain the illusion that they were unbeatable. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had turned the tide of a battle that no one had believed they could win, but the aliens weren't finished yet. They had underestimated humans for far too long, and now they were determined to crush them once and for all. Captain Elias stood on the bridge of a human warship, watching the stars stretch out before him. The air was thick with tension as they prepared for what could be the final battle. He had led his team through countless missions, but this one was different. It was no longer just about survival or retaliation. It was about taking back their planet and ensuring that the Vorath would never threaten Earth again. The Vorath had one final weapon left in their arsenal, a massive command ship known as the Leviathan. It was a behemoth of war and destruction, capable of wiping out entire fleets in a single strike. It was their last hope to break humanity's resistance, and they were coming for Earth with everything they had. Captain Elias knew the stakes. The Leviathan was headed straight for Earth's atmosphere. Its enormous weapons could wipe out entire cities with a single salvo, and humanity's forces were still recovering from the previous battles. The human fleet had been scattered and vulnerable, but Elias knew that Earth had something the Vorath could never anticipate: their unity, their unbreakable will to fight against overwhelming odds. Humanity had already shown that they could adapt faster than the Vorath could react, and now they would do it again. As the Leviathan entered Earth's orbit, Elias gave the order to engage the alien warship. The human fleet launched into action with a fury that surprised even the most hardened soldiers. Every ship was a weapon, a symbol of humanity's resolve, and they moved in perfect synchrony to face their enemy. The battle was chaos. The Leviathan fired its massive weapons with devastating force, and the human ships were no match for its firepower. But the humans didn't back down. They fought with every ounce of strength and determination. They used every trick they had learned over the course of the war. Their ships darted through the sky like insects, avoiding direct hits by weaving through asteroid fields and debris. They knew that their only chance to defeat the Leviathan was to exploit its weaknesses, and for the first time in the war, the Vorath realized they had made a mistake. They had expected the humans to rely on brute force. They had expected them to be easy prey. But they had forgotten one critical thing. Humanity did not give up when faced with defeat. Humans found new ways to fight, and now they were about to do just that. Elias led the charge, his ship darting through the chaos and straight toward the Leviathan's weak spot, a vulnerability in its hull that had been discovered during previous battles with the alien fleet. The human forces focused their fire on the Leviathan's shields and slowly chipped away at its defenses. But the battle wasn't just about the ships. It was about the human spirit that refused to break. Every pilot, every soldier, every engineer worked together in a way that the Vorath could never have anticipated. Humanity's creativity was on full display as they used alien tech reverse-engineered into weapons and strategies that the invaders could not predict. Elias knew the final push was coming. They had to break through the Leviathan's shields, or they would all be doomed. But as the battle raged on, Elias saw something he had never expected. The Vorath commanders began to hesitate. They were losing ground. They had been unable to adapt as quickly as humans had, and for the first time in the war, they were no longer sure they would win. Elias could see it in the eyes of his enemies. Their once certain dominance had been shattered, and in that moment he knew the Vorath had already lost the fight. They had come to Earth with the belief that they were the apex species, but what they had forgotten was that Earth was home to something far stronger than they could have ever imagined. They were not fighting just for survival. They were fighting for the right to remain free. And no matter how many ships the aliens sent, no matter how many forces they rallied, humanity would never stop fighting. Back, Elias watched as the Leviathan's shields began to crack with each strike. They made their final stand, but the Vorath were done. Their defeat was inevitable. Humanity had shown them what it truly meant to be the apex species, and the aliens had learned the hardest lesson of all. They had underestimated Earth's true power. The Leviathan, once a symbol of the Vorath Empire's indomitable might, was now a broken shell drifting in Earth's orbit, its massive hull torn apart by the relentless onslaught of humanity's forces. As the final blast hit its core, Elias stood at the helm of his ship, watching the alien warship crumble into a mass of twisted metal and shattered shields. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through space, a signal to both the Vorath and every human that Earth was no longer under threat. The war had come to an end. Humanity had prevailed, and the invaders were finally defeated. Captain Elias felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tempered by the toll of the journey. The countless battles lost and won, the lives sacrificed, and the cities destroyed. This victory was hard won, but it was earned through every human that had fought, that had stood their ground when the odds seemed impossible. Earth had shown that no matter how great the invader, no matter how superior the technology, humans could always find a way to fight back. The Vorath had underestimated them in every way. They thought they were the apex species. They thought their advanced ships and superior firepower would crush Earth in a matter of days. But what they had failed to understand was that humanity was not just a species driven by technology or might. Humanity was driven by something more powerful, a will to survive, a determination to never give up, no matter the cost. The final battle had been the culmination of everything humanity had learned through the war. They had adapted to alien technology. They had turned their cities into fortresses, their civilians into warriors, and their soldiers into masters of guerrilla warfare. They had used their creativity and their resilience to outsmart an empire that believed itself to be invincible. And now the Vorath had been forced to retreat. Their fleet was in ruins, their leaders scattered in fear of a species they could not understand. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a symbol of hope for the galaxy, a beacon of resistance to anyone who would dare underestimate the strength of a species they considered primitive. Captain Elias stood before the people of Earth as they celebrated their victory. The cities that had once been in ruins were now being rebuilt. The wounded were being cared for, and the dead were mourned with honor. The world was coming together not just to rebuild, but to stand united against any future threat. The war had changed humanity forever. It had forged them into something greater, something that the galaxy would never forget. But it had also taught them a valuable lesson. The cost of war was always high, and the true strength of any species lay not in its weapons or its technology, but in its ability to adapt and unite when faced with impossible odds. Humanity had proven that they were the true apex species, not because of their power or their advanced technology, but because they could face any enemy and emerge stronger for it as the sun set. Over the horizon of Earth, the people of the planet looked toward the future. Not with fear, but with hope. They had fought for their survival, and they had won. But they also knew that the fight was far from over. There would be other threats, other invaders who would seek to conquer the planet, but they also knew that they would be ready. They would never forget the lesson they had learned during the war, that the true strength of Earth was in its people, in their unity, their resilience, and their determination to never give up no matter the cost. Humanity had earned its place as the apex species, and they would defend it with everything they had for as long as the stars above them shone bright. The Vorath Empire had fallen, but humanity's story was just beginning. Humanity stood victorious. Earth had been saved from an overwhelming force that had once believed itself invincible. The Vorath Empire had crumbled under the weight of their own arrogance, and humanity had proven itself not just a species to be underestimated, but the true apex species of the galaxy. It had taken everything from unity to ingenuity, from courage to sacrifice. But in the end, humanity had not only survived, they had thrived. The battlefields were silent. Now the sky above clear of the alien fleet as the people of Earth began to rebuild their world. They did so not with fear, but with the knowledge that they had faced the greatest threat to their existence and emerged stronger than ever. The lesson was clear. The Vorath had sought to conquer and destroy, but they had forgotten one key thing. They had forgotten that Earth was not a world of weakness or submission. It was a world where the strongest force was not the weapons of war or the might of superior technology. It was the human spirit, the capacity to rise from the ashes and fight back no matter the cost. No matter the odds, the rebuilding had begun, and with it, a new era for Earth. The scars of war would remain. But so too would the resolve that had carried humanity through its darkest days. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in centuries, Earth looked to the stars with hope, not fear. They would never forget the struggle, the sacrifices, or the lessons learned during the war. But they would also never forget what had brought them through it all. Their unity, their creativity, and their refusal to give up when faced with impossible odds. The Vorath had believed themselves to be the apex species they had come to Earth, expecting to crush a weak and divided world, but instead they had met humanity's strength, a strength that had no equal across the galaxy. The people of Earth knew now that their place in the universe was secured. They were not just survivors. They were the true apex species, and no one would ever challenge their place again. With every rebuilt city, with every hand extended in peace to their allies, the world knew one thing for certain: humanity had earned its place at the top. The invaders had underestimated them. They had thought that Earth was nothing more than a primitive backwater planet. But they had learned the hard way that humans were not to be underestimated. Humans were capable of greatness. Humans were capable of victory. Humans were capable of surviving against any enemy, no matter how overwhelming the odds, no matter how impossible the task. With the last remnants of the Vorath fleet fleeing into the deep reaches of space, Earth was finally free. The war was over. The people of Earth had won, and they had proven once and for all that when you underestimate humanity, you make the greatest mistake of all. They had not only fought for their survival, they had fought for the future of every world that might one day stand against tyranny and oppression. Humanity was the apex species, and the galaxy would soon learn the true cost of underestimating them. The end.